our industry has compounded 16, 13, 10% growth over the last 3 years post-COVID, while GDP has been 2%, 2.5%, 3%. The largest of the players in our industry are coming out another record year for us. I'm telling Wall Street we're confident on the outlook, but I think offsetting that are the tariff battles. And will tariffs increase the price of lumber? Will they increase the price of energy? Will they increase the price of copper? That's going to be a roadmap that'll be interesting to watch in the next 3 months.
This is The Build-Up, a podcast by Procon Consulting. Thanks, Steve, for coming on The Build-Up. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I've had a lot of opportunities to have great conversations with you in Naples, Florida, your annual Growth and Strategy Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been really looking forward to just having this discussion and just getting a good feel for the industry. And so, but before we begin, I thought maybe it's a good opportunity just to share about your background,
Sure.
what you do, some of the great work that you're doing in the AEC industry.
Sure. First of all, great to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast. I've watched some of your other guests before. Engaging conversations, leaders from a lot of different perspectives. So I'm delighted to be a part of this today. A little bit about myself. I am originally from upstate New York. I'm a DC transplant like a lot of other people are. I've been here 25 years. The son of an engineer by training and background, but grew up in finance, working for larger banks before kind of settling into smaller consultancies. I'm currently a partner at ROG Partners, but we do a range of financial advisory services for the broader AEC sector. So that's business valuations, ownership transition planning, ESOPs, and I lead our M&A advisory practice. And Kyu, I've been doing mergers, combinations, acquisitions for design professionals, AEC industry of all different stripes and disciplines for about 20 plus years now.
Yeah, I really like that about your specialty. I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of experience in mergers and acquisition, but what I really liked about getting to know you and also your organization and having participated at the ROG Growth and Strategy Conference was the specificity on that industry alone and the people that you brought to the conference. I got to hear from other CEOs and leaders facing sort of the same challenges. And so thank you for coming on the show. What I thought we can get started is big picture.
Sure.
There's a lot of stuff happening today with the change in administration. I just thought that maybe you can share and give us your input on the state of the industry.
Sure.
And some of the excitements and any of the things that you see in the future.
Yeah. Well, let me just kind of rewind a little bit as to where we've been to maybe leading up to where we are heading into 2025 now. You know, it's funny, 5 years ago, as the pandemic took root, everybody kind of remembers where they were. You probably where you were March of 2020.
Yes.
And a lot of companies back then were unsure what direction things were going to move. And when they finally did, they were mission critical to doing what we do here in design and infrastructure and planning. That kind of precipitated a tremendous amount of growth in our industry. So the PPP loans came in, a lot of pent-up demand, particularly on the residential side, came in. Interest rates were low, money flowed from the Fed, and a lot of that came into the broader AEC sector. So when you look at the phenomenal amount of growth that this industry has had the last couple of years, I always like to look at the ENR 500. That's kind of a barometer for me, not a perfect one, but a barometer for me about the growth of the design aspects of our industry. In 2022, 16% growth rate, ENR 500. 2023, almost 13% growth rate. This year, I think when the 2024 results Q come out in a couple of months, we'll probably see high single digit 8 to 10% growth rates there. So our industry has compounded 16, 13, 10% growth over the last 3 years post-COVID, while GDP has been 2%, 2.5%, 3%. That's just ridiculous growth that's happened out of this industry. A lot of this growth has also happened before the advent of the government spending bills that came through. So Infrastructure, Jobs Act, CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, all of which had building funding related to it, whether it was in roadway, highway, facilities, power, energy, renewables. So it has been a phenomenal growth story for this industry for the last couple of years. I mean, you talk to professionals that have been like, this
Yes.
is as good as it gets for this industry over the last 4 or 5 years.
I think I was at your conference actually, and just talking to all the people and the amount of job openings that we all had was shocking because you work every day here and you think you're the only one that's experiencing this, and that's why I love just being connected to someone like you because you bring me connected with other people that you're like, okay, we're not alone. Speaking of the ENR, I can personally attest to that in that when we first submitted for the first ENR 100 CM
Yeah, CM.
firm, I think we barely made the cut at like 99. And we're having this like amazing year of growth. And it seems like everyone else is growing. And so we've been slowly making, some strides to move up in the rankings, but I definitely see
Yeah.
the growth with all the other different firms as well.
And people have those same issues. Leaders like yourself trying to find talent, trying to be more productive, project execution, trying to keep up with elevated backlogs. So where are we today? Just today I saw Stantec announce their fourth quarter earnings that came out. Record earnings, record growth, record backlogs, increased their dividend. 2 weeks ago was AECom, said the same thing. Every KPI was at record levels, high levels of backlog. They were raising their outlook for the year. 2 weeks before that, it was Tetra Tech. So the largest of the players in our industry are coming out and telling Wall Street, we're confident on the outlook, we're confident on our backlogs, we're confident on our forecast, we're raising our guidance for this year. That, I think, kind of coincides with the trends we've been seeing in this kind of innovation economy that's happening right now, where you see the kind of melding together of demographics and technology and industrial policy, and all of these things are changing in terms of new sectors and dynamics in terms of what's happening in our industry right now. Demand for semiconductor plants, for data centers, for affordable housing, for renewable and traditional power. So all of that is coinciding with traditional industry as well, spearheading the growth. So
Because you need
it's one of the most exciting
facilities.
times to be in this industry.
Right, and that's been my thesis. I think, and you call it innovation in technology economy. I think that's spearheading the need for building more things and things that are going to produce the chip plants. And what about the manufacturing industry? Do you see some of that?
Yeah, I think anytime you look at a broad industry landscape, there's sectors that are up, some down, some strong, some are soft. So I think certainly sectors that have benefited are water, power, environment,
Right,
manufacturing. We're seeing those reshoring capabilities are going to happen. We saw the announcement from Apple last week where they're announcing
$500 billion in
and
investment.
so that's going to, I think, accelerate in earnest over the next 4 or 5 years. Certainly, data centers. We're in Northern Virginia,
Mhm.
the hub of data center community in the world, right here as well. So that's exciting. I think offsetting that is the Architecture Billings Index, which is a barometer of how busy architects has actually been slow the last 20 months. The ABI measures proposal and billing activity, and anytime it's under 50, it kind of shows a softness in our industry. Well, it's been soft for almost 2 years now. And I think part of that is as the Fed stepped in to raise interest rates 2 years ago, you're seeing the direct impact in terms of commercial buildings, mixed use, office. So in our industry, some sectors are going to be busy, some sectors are going to be soft, and some sectors even across the country are going to be busy in terms of those sectors. So multifamily might be busy in Dallas or Atlanta, but it might be slower in New York or Seattle. So there's always a lot of regional geographic considerations too.
Speaking of interest rates, it's been fluctuating, and I know that in the news they're talking about increasing over the next or keeping steady. Like, how is that impacting our industry?
So I think if you look at some of the concerns that industry leaders have had over the last 2 years or so, and I'm kind of extracting data and anecdotes from groups like the ACEC Research Institute, surveys from the AIA and others, one of the biggest concerns for executives and founders has been inflation. So inflation kind of comes in, you have to pay more for salaries and wages, you have to pay
Right.
more for rent. So as we know, the Fed has been on a crusade to kind of lower inflation, and part of that has been raising interest rates, so taking kind of money supply out through raising interest rates. So when you look at home sales, which have basically are at a 30-year low, that's part of the kind of effects of that. They've started to cut rates in the fourth quarter of last year, remember, leading into the election. So we'll tend to see how that works out this year.
Do you see more cuts in the future?
So I think that's a good question. I'll put on my economist hat for a second. I think the Fed in the last month has said we're going to stay pat. We're not going to kind of move in one direction or the other. I think in the last week, you're generally seeing some signs of maybe a consumer softening. My own take is I think the Trump administration would like to soften demand as a way to kind of lower energy prices, lower inflation. They can only do so much on the supply side. So I think on the demand side, they're trying to see that soften a little bit as a way to get long-term rates to come down. So different market economists and different market forecasters have different expectations on cuts this year. I would not be surprised to see 1 or 3 cuts in the second half of this year.
Going back to some of the key indicators that you were talking about that you look for, you had mentioned the billing and what was the name of
the
that?
Architecture Billings Index. Yeah.
Are there any other indicators that you're looking for to kind of give you a better sense on what the future holds or what the health of the industry?
There's those big picture metrics, Architecture Billings Index, looking at the publicly traded companies when they have earnings reports about what their executives are saying on the outlook. I will tell you also anecdotally, our team, every quarter we're talking to dozens and dozens of executives, presidents, principals like yourself across the country, just getting the kind of word on the street, like, how's your year going? Are you hiring?
What has the sentiment been?
So when I walk the halls on our Naples conference, when I do a lot of calls to start the year with clients and prospects, almost all of them have said, another record year for us. 2022 was a record year. 2023 was a record year. 2024 was a record year. So many executives are coming into this year, strong backlogs, strong visibility. Again, if they're in architecture, engineering, or environmental or construction, there might be some variabilities there.
And
overall,
what are the variabilities with that?
Yeah, so if you're an architect and you've been doing work in mixed use or commercial or entertainment or hospitality, those markets may or may not be softer. If you're doing work in traditional power or substation and transmission and distribution, those might be strong. But if you're doing renewables, maybe you're looking at the administration's focus as you're a little bit worried about that. So I think you can slice and dice this sector in many different ways. But I would say in aggregate, we look at a lot of financial statements this time of year. We have a lot of conversations with executives this time of year, and many feel that they're still in good shape. They're hiring. They're pursuing M&A activities. All of those are risk-oriented activities that will tell you we still feel confident about the outlook of this industry.
Now, let's go back to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, because I think that's the one that has, we have the CHIPS Act. We also have the Inflation Reduction Act, but predominantly the infrastructure bill was the one that provided a lot of fuel to our industry.
Correct.
With rebuilding sort of our old and much needed repairs to our infrastructure as a whole. What are you seeing, and are you seeing some of the monies being put to use? And so what is your sense overall?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. The Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act was a bipartisan bill, close to $1 trillion. And typically governments, regardless, have used infrastructure as a way to kickstart economies when economies might be a little soft. And typically that money doesn't come out of the spigot at once, but it typically takes a long time for those big wheels to turn to get the money flowing. So I think in 2023, 2024, people were kind of awaiting when's that coming out. So now we're seeing that money come out. Highways, roadways, certain states might be different in terms of the kind of timing of that, but it's going into water infrastructure, highway, roadway. It's going into alternative and renewable energy, buildings and facilities. Yeah. So the money is flowing in a lot of different ways, a lot of different avenues at the federal, state, and local level. A tremendous game changer for an industry that was already busy. The industry was already busy, and then this was like a gift on top of that.
So do you see some of that? And I think I was looking up some stats. 80%, don't quote me on it, has been pretty much put on a contract, obligated for a particular use. It doesn't mean that someone's actually doing the work as of now, but what do you see when the money runs out? Do you still see the growth in the future?
Well, the notion that people have to understand is that a lot of infrastructure spending also comes from the states. So
Mhm.
prior to these acts coming through, a lot of the states are raising money for their own tollway, highway,
Mhm.
schools, public funding. So in many cases, the states, depending on the pendulums that shift in their state houses every year, that will change. So the federal was on top of that. So there is a thought process that this will be a massive bill that will do its work over a 5 or 7 year time horizon and then sunset. And then will there be other avenues or other repairs and renovations that have to come in? But I think that will be interesting to see play out over the next decade as to it's almost like a snake swallowing a mouse. And after they've swallowed that, kind of what's left to do in terms of other priorities. But this is a big country. We have a lot of needs from a building and infrastructure and environmental stewardship perspective. There's a lot of things that we can keep doing.
I think what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of optimism, there's a lot of growth ahead. Some of that is supported by the federal government injecting um, some funds to help with some of these projects. But along with that growth are these, M&A activities, private equity. I think in your conference you had talked about how the M&A market is strong. It's getting stronger every year and it's following sort of the growth trajectory in our industry. I wonder maybe if you can speak a little bit to that,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit to private equity and its role.
Yeah, so I've been a transaction professional for over 2 decades in this space now, and M&A activity typically comes in waves. It kind of ebbs and flows depending on economic activity, regardless of the industry. So in recessions, you tend to see industry M&A activity come
Hmm.
down because people are concerned about the outlook or risk. When people feel confident, when executives feel confident, they're more willing to undertake an acquisition because they know that's going to require integration activity. It's a capital outlay. So anytime you see higher levels of M&A activity, people are making bets. They're making
Hmm.
bets on a risk. They're taking a risk, and generally elevated levels of M&A activity, people are feeling pretty good about whatever the industry outlook is. The last 4 or 5 years have seen, in my career, record levels of consolidation activity than we've ever seen before. So this is an industry that has always been consolidating, but it's consolidating at an accelerating rate from that perspective. So why is that? There's two big reasons, including private equity, but let me talk about the big two. The first one is you have a huge number of baby boomer owners. Last one of that group just turned 60 last year. So it was a big group of people. That group of baby boomers was massive and they were more inclined to entrepreneurial activity. So they started a lot of engineering and environmental and CMPM practices in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. They now want to get out. So if they cannot transition internally, they're looking to sell externally. So we have a massive group of sellers prime age to want to do that. And on the flip side, you have a number of strategic buyers that I just said that have been growing, for the last 3 or 4 years at double-digit rates. Hard to find people, hard to expand externally. Their balance sheets are strong, and they are putting that money to work toward accretive, synergistic acquisitions. So that is a big piece of that. The ancillary part of that is the private equity part.
Yeah, and I feel like that the consolidation is to some degree wiping out a lot of the middle markets, right? Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
So we've thought this industry was going to go toward more of a barbell approach where there is kind of a vanishing mid-size firm, and we actually thought that was the case kind of after the Great Recession in 2009
Okay.
10, where it was going to scale to big players and small players. Small players kind of less than 50 people. Large players were going to be the ones 5,000 and above.
Mm.
So who are these firms between 100 and 1,000, and how are they going to survive? And they've actually done quite a good job of surviving. They've expanded ownership. They've kept their independence. Some have gone private equity. So there is, I think, still a vibrant middle core of middle market firms in this market. But there's always a challenge of having to compete with the national or global
Right.
players like the AEComs and Stantechs and NV5s, or the smaller 20 to 30 person firms that are local, nimble, might have a niche, can compete on cost a little bit better. So regardless of the market you're in, being in the middle has always been kind of a challenging place to be.
Yeah, and I feel like I speak with a lot of CEOs, and it seems like every day they're getting picked off by private equity. not so much with the, a larger company absorbing the company. And so I don't know. I don't know how to make of it.
Q, the private equity wave has been just the most impactful change to ownership models in our industry that I've seen in 25 years of doing this. Most of the companies in our space have been traditional practice builder type of
Hmm.
organizations. You have a business and you bring on associates and project managers and you transition ownership to them and you kind of pass the baton from generation to generation. You may form an ESOP at some point in time, but private equity, which is now impacting a lot of professional service practices. The accounting industry is
Hmm.
going through it, digital marketing, recruiters, professional service firms have now kind of stumbled onto the AE industry. And for all of the themes I talked about before, infrastructure renewal, environmental stewardship, solid, kind of growth nature of this industry, they love this industry. And even though our industry is one of elevator assets, so people go in an elevator and out, produce great cash flows, which private equity firms like, and they have been stepping in and recapitalizing firms one by one in this industry. So it's been remarkable to see this kind of unique marriage between engineers and designers and planners and construction managers and kind of a Wall Street private equity
Yeah.
type is coming together.
I think you brought up something that was interesting when you said, the baby boomer and then subsequent sort of generation thereafter, there is a sense of entrepreneurship that is lost. Because I do see that a lot of engineering companies are owned by people that want equity, that want ownership. Do you think some of this is a direct result of newer generation not wanting, to really put in the blood, sweat, and tears? And maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but some of the generational and cultural shift that's happening.
Yeah, I think you and I as Generation Xers kind of see the folks above us retiring and reflect on the younger generations coming up behind us. I think there's a practical notion that for younger people today who are burdened with student loans, it's hard to buy a house. They
Mhm.
may have kids and kind of the struggles of family formation to then say, oh, I'm going to, buy
But
into my practice here is something that's going to be hard for me to do. Has been a challenge for this generation. And I think those shifts in mindsets on ownership can change generationally over time. There's plenty of young people that are owners. There are plenty of young people that want to be owners, but not everybody wants to do that. And as I said before, I think the boomer generation had more of a inclination to do that than other generations. And I think if you cannot make the conversation about transitioning internally, then you have to look externally.
are you seeing in your field companies transitioning internally?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
And has the trend been more or has it been the same? Or do you see a trend more, hey, there's a lot of money in the market, whether it be private equity or some other firm that's interested? Um, is that making the decision to transition internally harder?
I think when you have a competitive landscape like ours, where there's thousands and thousands of firms that make up our industry, there's going to be an ownership model and situation that works for every firm. And frankly, there's no real correlation, oddly enough, on the ownership profile a company has and their performance. So some companies that are publicly traded, some companies that are ESOP, some are that are private equity, some that are owned by one or two people. There's no there's no roadmap like, oh, you have to be successful because you have this ownership model. My thought is that because we're seeing such huge amounts of M&A activity now, that is telling me that there's a challenge or a struggle to do the internal transition now. We certainly see them done. Is a little bit of a challenge to kind of get that first generation to sell to that second generation. That's often a first stumbling block. But companies that want to transition internally can, but they have to have the right people, they have to have the right models, they have to have the right culture in terms of doing that.
Do you see this generation of young engineers that are kind of coming into their mid career, do you see them starting their companies and building up a portfolio of business?
So you're an entrepreneur. I started my own business in 2010. We're both entrepreneurs. It's interesting to have these conversations with people that have had success and talking to other individuals about starting their own business because business formation and entrepreneurship and risk taking is always hard, regardless
Mhm.
of the market that you're in. I have thought that we might be on the cusp of a new ownership entrepreneur wave in our industry. Why do I think that? The average age of starting a business in the United States, any
I
guess?
actually want to know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Most people would say, oh, 24, because I see a Zuckerberg or
Yeah,
some
yeah,
tech
yeah, yeah.
executive or somebody's on Shark Tank. It's actually 40. 40 is the average age when someone starts a
I can
business
see that.
in this country. They've had about 15 or 20 years of experience. They have the courage and confidence to go out. Sometimes it's a job loss. Sometimes it's a frustration that leads them to do that. So right now in this country, we have a tremendous amount of millennials. Like I would guarantee for any design firm or engineering or CM firm who's going to listen to this podcast, most of your professionals are probably in their 30s, which is peak millennial. That generation is massive. And that generation is
They're the
typically
next future.
yes,
Really.
and they are typically the ones in your 30s, kind of leading up to that 40, are the ones that are interested in starting entrepreneurship. And when you have work from home, you can recruit off LinkedIn, you've got all of this work happening. Starting a business today is a lot easier than it was 20 years ago when you needed to hire people from the newspaper or you needed a closet full of phone systems or something like that. I think the bar to start a firm is much lower today than it was 20 years ago. So I think you have the age and the demographics. I think the question is, do the millennials, are they going
doing
to
it?
have the will to want to do that?
Right. Are
Yeah.
they doing it? Because, I mean, with all these consolidation that's happening, if you don't have the supply, like what you do, you may be out of a business to some degree, right? Like, so the question is we get it, like all the way to baby boomers, Gen Xers, and all the way down. Are we losing entrepreneurship? Are we losing that will and the desire to want to go on your own?
I think this is an industry, again, just observing it for 20 years, that's always evolving and it's always a fishbowl. There's the creative destruction of any business where
Right.
you have founders that matured to their 50s or 60s or 70s and they sold a business and that was their evolution. They started a business, they grew a business, and they sold a business. Maybe they sold it internally or to an ESOP, or maybe they sold it to an external buyer. And I think there's always going to be a group that says, I don't like that model. I want to start something for myself. And I see that today. And over the last 5 years, I've talked to people in every discipline possible: architecture, land surveying, civil MEP engineers that have started their own business. And I think they're putting their own spin on it. I mean, it's definitely a millennial type entrepreneurship model that might be different from certain generations in terms of the values they have, the way they win work, the way they get work. And I think that's exciting to see. And any industry is going to need that.
So I'm just curious, like, what inspired you to want to start your own business? Have you always had the desire?
It's funny. Most entrepreneurs will tell you that they stumbled their way into it, or they kind of lucked their way into it. Myself and my partners were a clear example of an industry that was going through a depression in the 2008, 9, 10 timeframe. We were advisors to that at another company. We thought we could have a different model on our own. So we took that step and decided to do it. And certainly when you start a business, it's always hard. But when you do it when economic times are tough, or you do it with other challenges that you have, you're always happy to kind of have another work anniversary and look back with a little bit of reflection and nostalgia. So I don't have some like great story like when I was 6, I started a business, or I had like kind of an ice cream stand or something like that. I wasn't that kid.
No, I think you make a good point. Sometimes the decision's made for you, right? Like given the external circumstances. Now, we have had one of the largest growth, like, what is it, 10, how many years have we gone?
I would say for this industry, maybe 2011, 12, it has been generally an elevator ride up.
Wow.
I mean, some sectors might have had some slowdown, but we've been very fortunate as an industry to not have kind of a kick in the gut recession or slowdown that we saw back then. We're covering a lot of bases so far.
We are.
Yeah, no, this
There's
is
a lot
fun.
there.
Yeah, this is fun.
Let's talk about the
Okay.
administration.
Okay, sure.
I know you covered it a little bit. With a new administration comes new policies, new changes. This one in particular, I mean, talk about rapid fire executive orders, we do a lot of work with the federal government.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of the clients you represent does a lot of the work with government, state
Yep.
institutions, and things of that. Can you give me a sense on what you're seeing within the first, what is it, 1 month that we've been, or I guess 2 months maybe, uh, in the administration, and what is your overall sort of perspective over the next, you know, I guess the first 100 days of the administration?
Yeah. You're from this area. I've been here almost 25 years. I feel like a entrenched local now. And I think for us, every 2 or 4 years, you just kind of roll with the
Yeah.
punches, and you kind of are just kind of numb to some of the changes as the pendulum swings from one side to the next. And certainly, I'm following things legislatively that come out of the AIA or ACEC and some of the bulletins that they're putting out about changes in the administration and some of their directives. I think certainly their goals are to, ease the regulation
Hmm.
burden of small businesses. Uh, uh, Troy Rudd, who is the CEO of AECom, recently said, we could actually be okay with less federal spending money if the regulatory hurdle came down. So I thought that was pretty kind of interesting to say that if permitting and compliance and regulatory issues came down to kind of speed up building activities, that could be even more beneficial to them than just more money, things like that. I think easing regulation. I think certainly going to see a push on renewing the kind of oil and gas, kind of permitting and licenses across the country. Trump has made that very clear. And then I think certainly the tax burden and I think the tax outlook for small business owners. A lot of individuals in our industry were really pushing for the kind of tax breaks that we saw in the kind of 2016 era and hoping that they'll be extended now. So I think taxes,
Regulatory.
regulatory framework, and energy are kind of the three things that I'm looking at.
Are there any other sort of policies that you're looking at with this administration that you're watching carefully or following pretty carefully?
Trump is a builder, so I
Mhm.
think Trump likes real estate. He sees the benefit of development of infrastructure. So I think that's always very strong and encouraging from that perspective. I think they'll want to see interest rates come down to some degree
Mhm.
to give some relief. We're trying to kind of speed up the kind of building that we need to make more housing in this country, which has been a big overhang in a lot of cases to kind of keeping prices high. But I think offsetting that are the tariff battles, and will tariffs, increase the price of lumber? Will they increase the price of energy? Will they increase the price of copper? Will they increase the price of a lot of other core building
Aluminum.
materials here for sure that you probably see as well? And I think that's going to be a roadmap that'll be interesting to watch in the next 3 months.
What is your general sense? Do you think that that will happen? And do you see some of the challenges ahead in construction?
Well, again, I think we're to some degree in uncharted territory here with how this tariff battle is going to play out, and whether they're going to be extended for periods of time, whether they're going to be used as a negotiating leverage for other types of policy changes between nations. But I think this administration has looked at it like we've been running massive trade deficits with other countries for a long time, and this is a way to kind of even that out that way. But I do take the administration at their word that they are looking to kind of have an external revenue service to kind of bring in external funding from these tariffs, how that might change the fabric of the way the country is funded in terms of income taxes, corporate taxes, borrowing. Certainly you're seeing that with DOGE and other types of programs happening where the goal is to kind of reduce the impact of the federal government footprint.
In terms of like taxes, are there any specific tax policies that you're looking for in? I know that they want to continue the extending the tax cuts. Are there additional things that you're watching for, or things? Well, it just, even if it is extending, what parts of the extensions are relevant to your clients and our industry?
I think there are probably certain R&D credits in Section 179 credits and other nuances in the tax code that I think this industry is probably going to want to see extended. There's a big
QBI.
yeah, there's going to be a big battle brewing,
Yeah.
frankly, between the Republicans about when and how this takes shape. Whether it's one big bill as the president wants, or it's going to be kind of appropriated through different legislative acts over time. But I think that's going to be an important legacy for this administration to have those tax cuts. So I think if you're an S corporation or a C corporation, you're going to talk to your own tax advisor about how this might impact you. Certainly, no one wants to see their taxes as a business owner go up. So I think we're going to have to see how all this plays out.
Can we talk a little bit about labor shortage
Yeah,
issues?
sure. Let's dig in.
Yeah. So, what is your general sense on that? Well, first, what is your general sense on labor shortage as a whole?
Yeah.
And do you see the administration making an impact, maybe even through like H-1B visa
Sure.
programs? Because I do think that in our engineering field, we have a shortage
For sure.
that's across the board.
Yeah, we have a shortage of everyone. We have a
Mhm.
shortage of surveyors. We have a shortage of architects. We have a shortage of people in the trades.
Engineers,
And
trades,
it's
right.
hard to find everybody. And this is an industry struggling for talent. And I think that it's kind of a nuanced conversation because as I said, you're seeing a brain drain of the boomers starting to kind of check out. So those folks
Yeah.
that are in their 60s now, they're in some organizations, they're retiring, they're quasi-retiring, they're selling their shares down, they're getting out. You then have a smaller group of Generation Xers just broadly in this country, like you and I, those individuals that
Can
were,
I give you some theory on
yeah,
that?
sure,
Sorry.
yeah,
So, Gen X.
born between 65 and
Yes.
80. Yep,
So, for me, when I was in school, the dot-com era was
yes,
just getting
for
started.
sure.
And so, a lot of my engineering degree peers were not going into engineering. They were getting picked up by all the consulting firms.
Yeah,
And so, I think that situation, and again, I don't have any like actual stats to show that, but I think subsequently all these other industries competed, like whether it be cybersecurity, whether it be data or technology, now AI. I think that you have these kids that are going to school with engineering background, and getting an engineering degree at any school is difficult to begin with. You're ready to go off to work, but then you're getting picked off by other industries that are paying significantly more.
sure.
And so I have my opinions about that.
Well, and certainly we've made a push in this country to do more STEM-related career paths here because the country needs that. And you would hope that kids that go into STEM would advance in those science or engineering and math trades. Although in some cases they're not. They're going to work for Amazon. They're going to work for a hedge fund. They're going to work for someone else that also needs that kind of quantitative oriented, and the pay or compensation or lifestyle, whatever it is, might be better for them. One of the challenges I think generationally is our colleges are just not producing enough of those kids in mass. We've seen the peak in undergraduate degrees was in that 2010, 11, 12 timeframe, which was about 18 million, and now we're producing about 15 million degrees in this country. So we have lower degrees, lower birth rates, kids making other decisions. College is expensive. We all know the reasons. So now you have a smaller pool of kids to choose from at these college fairs than you did 15 years ago.
And by the way, we're giving a lot of degrees to a lot of international students that want to be
Yep.
here. And I know that H-1B is kind of a politically controversial topic, which is the reason why I wanted to maybe even get your take on that.
Well, we need highly qualified kids to do these jobs in this country, and I talk to companies, and they have kids from Europe, they've got kids from the Middle East, they've got kids from the Far East, they've got
India.
kids from South America, they've got kids from Canada who work in their companies now. So if we're not going to make a concerted effort to produce what we need in aggregate numbers here, then we have to find them some ways. Or what we're seeing now, which we may talk about, is AI and productivity. Are we going to kind of see that productivity where you can still produce the same amount of drawings or output or consulting with fewer people? And does technology have a role in that?
Can we talk about that? Like,
No.
what is your sense there? I mean, are you seeing innovation and technology being adopted as a way, for one, to address some of the labor shortage, but two, we are seeing this new era of AI, and the power of AI is almost unimaginable in what it can do. Are you seeing in your client pool and in conversations you're having, people being more receptive to adapt? Because our industry is generally very
It's
conservative,
slow, right?
slow to adopt.
Sure.
And engineers generally
Yes.
want to make sure that, hey, I'm not interested in doing anything outside of sure thing.
Yes. Yes. So AI is a way of taking over every industry and every business process and practice, and certainly for the AEC industry, it's no different. Everything from using it to design more effective proposals and marketing, to the actual design process itself, and kind of automating and speeding that up, is revolutionary to see. I mean, there's no other way to kind of use those words except it's revolutionary. And you talk to the folks at some of the software companies and Autodesk and others, and they're just seeing kind of a torrent of need and interest in this right now about how AI and machine generated learning will help make our processes more efficient, accurate, safer, cost effective. I don't know if any of us knows the exact story of how this will play out, of whether it's overrated or it's underrated or the sky's the limit. But yes, all of our clients are using it in some form, whether it's in the marketing or in the design or the execution of the project management process.
Now, do you see A&E firms leveraging technology not only to use it to improve their processes, but also use it as an extra profit center to actually deliver services of technology?
The conversations I've had with CEOs, I'd be curious if you're seeing that, because most of the ones in this kind of infancy stage the last 2 or 3 years have just been understanding the tools, taking the courses, what can I do with it, how can we improve performance, but not necessarily having that as kind of a tab on their website that's a service that they offer. At least we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because I do think that that's the sense that I get from just not only is it just, it's one thing to be like, okay, I'm tapping into the technology to improve my proposal
Right.
services or what have you, but then there's an actual tool that you've created and you're actually selling the tool because it's scalable and there's revenues and fees that you can collect in addition to help with the growth.
It's possible. I mean, I think our industry has always kind of sold hours. I mean, we've sold hours for whatever we're doing, and I think that is a model where you need more hours or more people, and that's just the kind of two inputs of that, or raising your fees. So if there's some way to kind of also have a technology component of that, of being able to charge clients for that, either saving them time, saving them money, we'll have to see.
Any thoughts on M&A and where it's headed over the next few years? Do
Yeah.
you see the continuity of growth
Yeah.
for many, many years ahead? I know we just talked about, there seems to be a huge backlog, huge optimism in spite of all the different changes that's happening with the administration and all the things that's going on. But what about 2? What about 5? What about 10?
Yeah, I think so. Part of the M&A wave that we've experienced, that I've experienced over time, is there's often periods of active consolidation, but then there's periods of integration. So you certainly have a handful of companies that will acquire 3, 4, 5, 6 companies a year, and they have the program and they have the people and the tools to do that. But most organizations are able to acquire 1, maybe 2 companies a year, and they want to make sure that they fold those individuals carefully into their organization, because bringing together 2 different firms is like 2 different families, and it's a cultural overlap, and wanting to kind of over communicate benefits and roles. Most people hate change. Certainly engineers hate change. So doing these in a way that is constructive, because they can be very fragile. So it wouldn't surprise me that with all of this frenetic M&A activity, you see some participants say, we're going to tap the brakes a little bit because we need some time to integrate. But I think overall, as I said before, this is a consolidating industry. I think the wild card here is going to be the private equity sector, because the private equity sector has come in and they've recapitalized a huge number, 20% of the ENR 500, blue chip names, venerable brands. And part of their process is to grow and scale through acquisitions. And it's very hard to do that organically.
And what would be the end game in your mind? Like at some point, there's an exit.
Correct.
Is it to just package it and sell it off to eventually an AECom or?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I think we're still in the first innings of how this is all going to play out. So I think the first 2 or 3 innings was a massive amount of companies decide to go private equity because the valuations were there, because they didn't want to sell to a publicly traded firm. They couldn't sell internally. And there was this kind of unique role model here. And I think some are found it's a great partnership for them. In some cases, it might be a rocky ride, because now all of a sudden you've got an investor group that owns a majority of your company, and they're calling the shots to some degree. I would probably say the fact that we've seen so many other companies go private equity is a little bit of a validation that the model's working. We read or saw train wrecks left and right. People wouldn't be stepping into it. So I think that's helping validate that. But I think, Hugh, over the next 3 to 5 years, these companies that have taken private equity have a couple of different options. They can sell to another financial sponsor. They can have a second exit or a second recapitalization to another group that will then take them to the next level. They could join forces with another company. We saw that with Gannett Fleming and Trans Systems, two transportation-oriented companies that had private equity and have come together that way. I don't know if they're going to go IPO or public route. That seems to not be something that a lot of these companies have found. So my sense is they're probably going to find other financial partners to do the dance with.
Okay. So if you are an owner interested in considering M&A market, what are the things that you would advise on what to look out for, what to consider, any lessons learned that you may be able to share?
I've been very grateful to have worked with a lot of owners that have helped sell their companies with over 20 years. And many have different stories. And sometimes it's different. It could be a sole owner and they've just reached a point in their life where they just want to slow down and just kind of join forces with someone larger. In some cases, they may have different partners. You might have 15 partners, and are they all on the same page about, do we want to sell, to who, what does that look like? Is this the right time? There's always a dynamic of buyer-seller, but there also might be an inter-party dynamic of the owners of the seller group. Are they on the same page that way? So I think, the old Socrates advice of know thyself is very important. Are you ready as an entrepreneur and an owner of a business to say, I can now be employee number 3027 to somebody and then work for somebody for a couple of years. So I think that's an important reflection of, can I kind of take that one hat off and then put a new hat on, making sure that you have a business that is valuable, that is growing, that can see the synergies and the benefits of tapping into a larger firm with greater recruiting resources, marketing resources, financial resources, managerial resources, getting your firm kind of sale ready, they always say, in terms of financially, organizationally, cleaning house a little bit, getting ready before you kind of do that is certainly very important. But again, I think a lot of it comes down to timing. If I could just give a takeaway, it comes down to timing. And I think for a lot of individuals today that have had 2, 3, 4 years of record growth, a lot of them are saying, if I don't do it now, I can get a great valuation, a great multiple, kind of a great exit strategy. If I don't do it now, I don't know what the next 1 or 2 or 3 years is going to be.
Yeah, and I think that not only are companies growing, but the valuation is growing, right?
We've seen multiple expansion. That is for sure.
And that says a lot about the value that our work is being placed in the marketplace, right? Our work is now finally being recognized as being important. Whether that's going to last for, more than this period in time, I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that, but.
And I think time will tell, and every generation will write their own story as to how this plays out as well. Mm-hmm. So whether it's going to be entrepreneurship, whether it's going to be technology, whether it's going to be new project delivery and project management execution, I think every generation will kind of find that out, which makes this exciting. I mean, so I think our industry is crucial to our communities, crucial to society of what we do.
Yeah, it builds the hospitals.
That's exactly right.
It builds the schools. I tell people all the time, like it's tangible.
I mean, you drive around this region and you could we worked on that, we worked on that.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's got to be cool to be able to tell people.
Yeah, it isn't, some abstract,
yes.
programs that, I definitely agree. And I think that it's an important industry that I'm very passionate about. As we're kind of coming to the end, I want to give you the opportunity to maybe give some sort of your company and what you do.
Sure.
I also love your annual ROG conference and what people can get out of that, because the more people that do show up, the more that when I show up, I can kind of share. And you run a really great.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's a fun event. Yes, our company, ROG Partners, Rusk O'Brien Gido Partners, ROG-partners.com. As I said, we have a specialized practice. We have hardworking, dedicated people that just love to help our clients solve problems, whether that's on valuation assignments, whether that's on consulting assignments, whether that's on M&A assignments. We really either help loving companies measure value, grow value, or extract value is what I've always thought about our business. And our event every November in Naples is a lot of fun. You've been there. And what we've really tried to do is we thought that there was a space for a growth-oriented conference to get leaders excited about growth, because the 5 years up until 2011 were horrible. So we try to have this invention of a growth conference that also incorporated elements of a TEDx-like event. So having people come in that were talking about strategy, that we're talking about motivation, leadership, that we're talking about branding, things that were a little bit different to this industry. You know, you can only listen to so many, I hate to say it, water, wastewater panels or traffic panels or something. But we wanted to have something different. We want to have something different for leaders that wanted to renew their organization's growth, but also I think personally or come out of that with a little bit of renewal for their own personal journey as a leader.
And I know you specialize in M&A, but this conference is not really M&A. This conference is growth and strategies, and you get a sense of what branding and marketing, what leadership, employee retention, that's something that is applicable to anyone who's running an organization.
You know, there's a lot of different companies that have a lot of different owner models. So we embrace all these different ownership models of people that come, and we talk about a lot of different fun topics. We also try to have fun. That's our goal of conference. I mean, you want to go to a conference that's fun. So we have fun speakers, hopefully. We bookend it with some great activities. We've got a fun golf outing. I think the industry's only golf outing, spouse and family friendly. I'll tell you, it's like putting a wedding on every year. So I'm on the plane ride home. I'm like, man, I know next week we're going to be talking about what we have to do next year, but it's like, if we just enjoy this one.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate you coming on the Build Up.
It's fun.
And this was great. Like, I think your input, your insight has been invaluable. I can personally attest to it. And
well, I appreciate the time. You're a great friend and a great leader, and we appreciate these opportunities to, advance thought leadership for this industry in this format, in this great setting. So thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
That's a wrap.
Okay.
All right.
Boy.
We jumped over. I was supposed to follow this, but you gave me so many nuggets of information. I was like, oh my gosh.
Boy, time flew.